Chapter 8, Bite to the Finish. The chains binding Sunset rattled as she finally slipped out of them, tossing the last one over her head. They couldn't be heard over the argument those girls were making upstairs. Interestingly enough, Twilight's voice was absent from the conversation. She stretched her arms and worked the kinks out of her shoulders before lifting the bottom of her shirt up to examine the burn marks. They no longer hurt, but the skin was still black. Sunset sat down again, crossing one leg over the other. Twilight left a mark on me. It's only fair I leave a mark on her, too. She put on a feral smile and clasped her hands together. They could argue and protest all they wanted, but Sunset knew the choice Twilight would make. It was just a matter of waiting now. I'm not about to just hand off Twilight to a vampire. Rainbow shouted. But, Rainbow, Twilight said softly. Applejack cut over her. I hate it too, but what choice do we have? Girls, I'll. Rainbow slammed her fist on the door. Ask for something else, Sunset. No. I'll do it. Twilight yelled. The room upstairs fell silent, while Sunset grinned to herself in the dark. I'll do it, Twilight said again in a softer voice. It's just a little bit of blood. It's for the greater good. Oh, I can assure you, Twilight, blood isn't the only thing I'm taking. The doorknob wiggled, then abruptly stopped. Twilight, Rainbow said in a serious whisper. You and I both heard all the things she said earlier. What if she wants more than blood? Twilight was silent for a moment. I trust her. Underneath her trembling voice, there was a note of confidence. The knob turned again, and light spilled down the steps, silhouetting Twilight's figure. She closed the door and descended the stairs, stopping at the base. She gasped, seeing the coil of chains and the small sliver of light the moon provided. Sunset. Don't worry, Sparky. Sunset got up from her chair and stepped into the light. No surprises this time. Here I am. How'd you get out of those chains? When did you get out? About 2 minutes ago. As for how, Sunset played with her pointed ear. Let's just say I'm quite slippery when I want to be. Sunset stepped closer, watching Twilight raise her arms and cover her chest. Don't be so modest, Twilight. I told you, you're beautiful, every inch of you. Twilight stood her ground against Sunset's advancement, but she began to tremble. You just want blood, Sunset. That's all you need, right? That's all I need but not all I want. She reached out and gently pulled Twilight's arms down. And deep down, you want the same thing I do. I want you to help us. Twilight made sure to avoid Sunset's eyes. Sunset slid around to Twilight's side, running a finger up her arm. I will, I promise. But I need to help myself first. And maybe I can help you, too. Twilight shook her head. I don't need help. Sunset blew in Twilight's ear, making her shudder. You're such a stickler for rules and regulations. Wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to listen to that little voice in your head telling you right from wrong? I did that already, Twilight whispered. I never want to do it again. Moving behind Twilight, Sunset wrapped her arms around Twilight's waist, pulling her into a light hug. What if I was beside you the entire time? She blew down Twilight's neck. Twilight stifled her gasp. No, I don't want to be a vampire, Sunset. Please, let's just get this over with. Really? But I want to take my time with you. Sunset pressed into Twilight's back and raised her hands to just below Twilight's breasts. Jolts of electricity snapped through Sunset's body, and her voice came out as a husky pant. I want to savor this moment. Relish every touch and taste. Twilight didn't resist Sunset's grip, though she shook like a leaf in the wind. I know you, Sunset. As strong as those vampire urges are, I know you won't go through with it. Sunset gently turned Twilight's head, exposing her neck. And what if I do? You won't. There it was again, the confidence buried beneath the fear. Sunset paused, hovering just over Twilight's soft skin. Did she really want to do this? Twilight was her best friend. Sunset shook her head. She didn't have time to ponder morality. She was in the moment. This moment with just her and the object of her desire. Sunset sank her teeth into Twilight's neck, eliciting a gasp from Twilight and a moan of pleasure from herself. Twilight's blood spilled into her mouth, warm and rich, sweet with a little kick. Ecstasy blossomed across all of Sunset's senses as she enjoyed every drop of Twilight's blood. Her strength returned, prompting Sunset to suck even more of Twilight's life force. Twilight. You don't know how good this feels. Sunset raised her hands, unbuttoning Twilight's vest. But you will soon. Twilight made small moans, but was limp in Sunset's grasp. She made one more draw from Twilight's neck, then pulled her fangs out, letting some of the blood dribble down her chin, before lapping it up. Sunset spun Twilight to face her, pulling the vest off her shoulders. Twilight looked up at her through unfocused eyes. I trust you, son. Sunset stopped undoing Twilight's tie. She trusts me. The jolts of ecstasy dancing up and down her body started to fade. Why? I have her right where I want her. Another voice spoke up in her head. You got what you needed. Now leave her alone. But I could do so much more. I could make her a vampire. Sunset bit the inside of her cheek, drawing a thin stream of blood. What was wrong with her? Why was she hesitating now of all times? She looked into Twilight's violet eyes. They stared back at her with the naive trust that made Sunset want to hit her and kiss her at the same time. Fine, Sunset said, running a thumb against Twilight's cheek. You win, Twilight. I want you so badly. But tonight isn't the night, I guess. She leaned forward and pressed her lips against Twilight's, tasting refreshing mint still lingering on her tongue. Sunset pulled away, then hoisted Twilight into her arms and glided up the stairs. The rain booms were gathered on the other side of the door, and they jumped back when Sunset kicked it open. Upon seeing Twilight in Sunset's arms, they each broke into a tirade of questions, assaulting Sunset's ears with their echoing voices. She ignored them all and carried Twilight into the chapel, resting her on the nearest pew. Finally, she turned and addressed the group. She's going to be fine. Just make sure she has food and water when she wakes up. Rainbow gave a worried look to Twilight, then glared at Sunset. Did you do anything to her? Sunset flashed a grin. You would have heard if I did. She turned down the aisle and walked toward the broken window at the front. Guess she was right after all. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take a walk. She jumped into the air and glided through the window's opening, welcoming the night air against her face. Asterisk. Rarity leaned over Twilight, falling into the disgusting habit of biting her manicured fingernails. She looks dreadfully pale. Fluttershy knelt beside Twilight and measured her pulse. She seems stable. But I think you're right, Sunset took a lot of blood. It had only been 10 minutes since Sunset's departure. 10 long minutes of monitoring Twilight and wondering how much they could trust Sunset. Rarity clutched a fist against her chest. It was better to be safe than sorry. Come on, girls, let's get Twilight to a hospital. What about Sunset? Pinkie asked. Rainbow helped lift Twilight onto Applejack's shoulders. As long as she catches the bat and locks it up, we'll be fine. I'm sure the princess will write back any minute with a way to fix all of this. With Twilight secured and murmuring to herself, Applejack led the rainbooms out of the steeple and down the hill. The moon was full tonight, its luminescence outshining the stars surrounding it. The forest around them was eerily quiet, even the wind made little noise as it blew through the trees. No sounds came from the animals or insects within. As the hair on Rarity's neck began to stand up, Pinkie stopped walking and random parts of her body began to convulse. Pinky sense, activating. Her hair vibrated and she pointed to the sky. Look out! A shadow swooped in, dive-bombing Applejack. She threw herself to the ground, grunting loudly as Twilight's extra weight crushed her. The shadow swooped again, silhouetted by the moonlight. Rainbow jumped in front of Applejack and shot her fist out, catching the shadow in the nose. It yelped and came to a stop, holding its nose. "Aw man! What's with you girls and aiming for the face?" Lyra asked in a nasally voice. Instead of responding, Rainbow heaved Applejack to her feet and shouted, "Run!" They made a break for the forest again, but a blur sped in front of them and blocked the path. Bon Bon grinned at them, showing off her pointed teeth. "Going somewhere?" The girls skidded to a stop and circled up. Lyra approached them from behind, while Bon Bon continued to smile. Rarity held her hands up. "Now, ladies, I'm sure there's a peaceful solution to all this. Give us your blood," Lyra said eagerly. "That doesn't involve blood-sucking," Rarity finished. "Nope," Bon Bon said, taking another step closer. "That's the only way this is gonna end." Applejack groaned. "Great, done in by two vampires in the middle of a creepy forest." Bon Bon made a noncommittal shrug. "Well, a vampire and a half. Lyra turned me, but I can't fly or mind control people. How exactly does that work?" Applejack asked. "Hot vampire sex," Lyra shouted. "And then I gave her some of my blood. And then, more sex," Bon Bon added. Rainbow gagged. "Okay, you can just bite me now." Lyra flexed her fingers. "With pleasure." She sprang into action, teeth aimed for Rainbow's throat. A clove of garlic sailed through the air, aiming for Lyra's eye. She caught it mid-pounce and crushed it into pieces. "No." Pinky tapped her fingers together and made a high-pitched giggle. "Well, there goes my last garlic. New plan." She threw herself in front of Rainbow. "Bite me instead." Rarity gaped at her. "Pinky," Pinky gave her a subtle wink, then flickered her eye toward Rarity's purse. Yes, take Pinky first." "What?" Rainbow shouted. "Have you both oof?" Rainbow massaged her stomach. Sure, take Pinky." "Dibs." Lyra tackled Pinky to the ground. "Bonnie, you can take Applejack first." Applejack adjusted Twilight against her back and took a defensive stance. It didn't do much for her when Bon Bon rushed her and brought her to the floor. Twilight rolled across the ground, groaning and curling into a ball. "Applejack!" Rarity shouted. She preemptively reached into her purse and wrapped her hand around her pepper spray. As she pulled it out, Lyra let out a yell of pain and jumped away from Pinky. Her scream was enough to distract Bon Bon. Rarity jumped forward and sprayed her right in the eyes, causing her to flail and scream as well. Applejack kicked her off and got to her feet, then grabbed Twilight. "Thanks, Rare." Rarity gave her a quick thumbs up while she ran over to Lyra, who was still rubbing her tongue against her sleeve. Rarity sprayed her with a face full of mace, then helped Pinky up and dragged her down the path. "You okay, dear?" Pinky rubbed her neck. "Why yeah, I'll be fine. She just took a bigger gulp than I thought." The rainbooms left behind the screaming vampires and ran into the forest, sacrificing the moonlight for the dark camouflage of the trees. "Now what do we do?" Fluttershy asked between breaths. "Keep running until we get to the van, then drive as far away as possible," Rarity said. Two loud hisses echoed after them. Asterisk. Sunset crept closer, her ears twitching at the chittering coming from the other side of the roof she was perched on. She looked over the edge and toward the park across the street. Two kids were talking under a tree, illuminated only by the pale moon. Moving her eyes up, Sunset saw the bat perched in the topmost branch, eyeing the children. With the amount of chittering it made, she was surprised neither of them had heard it. One of the kids stood up and stretched, then waved a hand to his friend. As he left, the bat twitched its nose and flexed its wings. Sunset tensed her muscles as well, pressing herself against the rooftop. The other boy got up and adjusted his propeller hat before walking toward the houses that bordered the park. The bat swooped from its perch, launching itself at the back of his neck. Sunset did likewise, flying faster than an arrow. She snatched the bat from midair, just before it got to the kid's neck, and landed at the top of the tree. "Well, you've been busy, haven't you, you little bloodsucker?" Sunset flicked the bat's ear as it struggled in her grasp. It stuck its teeth into her hand, out of irritation or hunger, Sunset wasn't sure. It hurt, but Sunset refused to let go. She looked down at the boy, standing at the edge of the sidewalk, staring up with his mouth open. Sunset grinned. "No one will believe you." She jumped and glided away, savoring his look of incomprehension. Sure, she could have drunk his blood while she was here, but she had already had 2 meals on the way. And there was a tiny voice telling her biting children was wrong. She looked at the bat. "So now what?" As if to answer her question, the distant screams of her friends reached her ears. She sighed and turned back toward the forest. Well, at least this night promises to be exciting. She gave the bat a little shake. "So how many people did you bite?" It only screeched angrily and wriggled even more. "Keep it up and I'll just snap your neck." The bat actually fell quiet, though it continued to bite Sunset's hand. She didn't think much of it. She was already a vampire, what else could it do? It took her a few short minutes to reach the ever-free forest. She didn't need her super hearing to hear the commotion going on below her. Rainbow screamed, a branch was swung, and someone yelled, "Ow! Goddammit! Oh, a party!" Sunset said enthusiastically. She dropped down below the tree line and landed on a branch, just in time to see Rainbow and the girls run underneath her. She jumped again and glided alongside them. "So, what did I miss?" "Aik!" Each of them screamed, and Rainbow reached out and slapped Sunset with a tree branch. "Ow! What the hell?" "Oh, sorry, Sunset," Rainbow panted. "I thought, wait, why am I apologizing, you're a vampire too." "Yeah, I'm the vampire that caught your stupid bat." Sunset held it up, showing off its scrunched nose and large fangs. "Yeesh, that thing is ugly." "I know, right?" She gave it a solid bap on the head, knocking it unconscious. "Here you go." She dropped it into Fluttershy's hands. Even she looked a little apprehensive of it. Rarity came to a stop by a large tree, doubling over to catch her breath. "Sunset, could you do us one more little favor, please?" Sunset floated up to the closest branch and sat down, watching all of them struggle for air. "I don't know. What's in it for me?" She looked at Twilight, still knocked out and being carried by Applejack. "I already got Sparky's blood." Rarity looked at her in desperation. "Sunset, please, just help us. We're..." The wind picked up, and Lyra and Bonbon burst from the foliage and onto the narrow path. Lyra sported a cut that was already healing up, and Bonbon's sleeves had been torn. "All right, no more games," Lyra said. "We're gonna, oh, hi, Sunset." Sunset lifted a hand. "Sup? I didn't know you were a vampire." "Yeah, I was kinda the first one." "That's cool. Wanna help us drink these girls?" Sunset tapped a finger against her chin. You know, as tempting as that sounds, she jumped down and stood between the two vampires and the rain booms. "I'm gonna have to say no." Lyra frowned. "Why?" Sunset rushed forward and delivered a solid roundhouse kick to Lyra's jaw, sending her straight into the air. "I don't share food." Bonbon gaped at Sunset, then hissed and slashed at her with her sharp claws. Sunset ducked to the side and grabbed Bonbon by the arm. With an effortless heave, she lifted Bonbon off the ground and tossed her up into the air after Lyra. Rarity's shoulders relaxed and she slumped against the tree. "Thanks, Sunset." "Oh, it's not over yet." She tilted her head toward the group. "But when this is over, I'm drinking all your blood." She jumped into the air, bursting above the trees in time to see Bonbon reach the peak of her flight and start to fall back to the earth. Before she could fall too far, Lyra flew over and caught her. "So, vampire fighting?" Lyra asked. "This is a thing that's happening right now." Sunset crossed her arms. "Yep. Cool. But are you sure you want to go 2-on-1? More like 1.5. Lyra growled, her fangs gleaming softly in the moonlight. "Semantics, you're still outnumbered, Sunset," she said firmly as she cracked her neck. "I'm going to ask you one more time, are you going to help us drink tonight or not? Allow me to answer that in the following way." Sunset flew forward and brought her fist across Lyra's cheek. Lyra staggered back, keeping a tight grip on Bonbon before righting herself in the air. Sunset's eyes followed Lyra as she descended to the ground, setting her friend down and rubbing her cheek. Sunset flew ahead of the two, dropping down into the trees as she quietly circled her opponents, smirking at the confusion on their faces. "What's wrong, Lyra? You look a little lost." "Need some help?" she teased, her voice echoing throughout the small clearing. "I'm just getting started." Lyra huffed, baring her fangs as she rotated her stance in an attempt to spot Sunset. Sunset jumped forward the moment Lyra turned her back to her, bringing her arm back as she nailed Lyra with a fierce blow to the back of her head. Before she could follow it up, Bonbon reared her fist back and struck Sunset's sternum, knocking her to the floor. Sunset rolled on her back and swept her legs out, bringing Bonbon down with her. Just as Sunset got back to her feet, Lyra slammed a fist against the back of her head, sending her to the ground once more. Sunset saw dirt, flipped over onto her back, then saw the underside of Lyra's boot. Blood splattered across Sunset's face, and her nose made a terrible crack. "So, who's lost now, Sunset?" Lyra said, slamming her foot into Sunset's side this time, knocking her into the bushes. Sunset licked up the blood dribbling into her mouth and grunted. "Why does everyone go for the nose?" By the time she was on her feet, the pain was gone, and Sunset could snap her nose back into place. She burst back into the clearing, claws ready to strike, only to find it empty. "Crap, where'd they go?" Sunset spun around, her sense on high alert. "Gotcha." Lyra's arms wrapped around Sunset's frame and held her tightly in place. Sunset struggled and kicked her legs, but Lyra had a surprisingly strong grip. Bonbon appeared from the shadows, fist drawn back, and punched Sunset in the face. It was followed up by 3 more direct hits before Sunset delivered a kick to Bonbon's stomach, knocking the wind out of her. While she caught her breath, Sunset planted her feet firmly on the ground and flipped Lyra over her back, slamming her into Bonbon and knocking the two of them to the ground. "I'm getting very close to being done screwing around with you two," Sunset grunted, wiping the blood off her face with her sleeve. "I suggest you run along and find something else to snack on." Lyra rolled off of Bonbon off and pushed herself back onto her feet before picking up her friend, bridal style. "You know, you're right. We'll be off now," she said simply. She ran off into the forest, leaving a faint trail of dust behind. "Yeah, you better run." Sunset crossed her arms and smirked. She blinked. "Ah, crap." She ran after them, swiping vines and branches out of the way. She reached the edge of the forest, where the rain booms were still scrambling toward Fluttershy's van. Lyra swept around and cut them off, grabbing Rarity in the process. Sunset made a running jump, throwing herself over everyone's head and tackling Lyra to the ground. They grappled in the dirt for a moment before a strong hand grabbed Sunset's neck and slammed her into a tree, the bark cracking behind her. Bonbon slammed a fist into Sunset's gut, forcing up blood and making Sunset choke on air. She wrapped her arms around her stomach and dropped to one knee, watching Lyra pin Fluttershy down while Bonbon caught Rarity by the arm. Sunset grit her teeth together and stood up. "Hands off my food!" She ripped a branch from the tree and hurled it at Bonbon, nailing in her the head. When it bounced to the ground, Applejack picked it up and smacked her again. Sunset bolted forward and got her hands around Lyra's neck before she could bite into Fluttershy's. Lyra threw her elbow back and smashed it into Sunset's rib. Sunset cringed but refused to let go, tightening her grip on Lyra's throat instead. Lyra raked her claws into Sunset's arm, drawing blood and leaving long lacerations across her arm. Cries of pain built up in Sunset's throat, but she refused to give Lyra the satisfaction of acknowledging she was causing any pain. Just as Lyra's scratching began to weaken, Bonbon swiped her claws against Sunset's cheek, drawing a yell of pain and surprise from her. Bonbon then grabbed Sunset and flung her forward, where she crashed into the side of the van, denting it before falling limply to the ground. "Sunset, are you all right?" Rarity asked, gingerly picking her up by the arm. Sunset shakily managed to get to her feet, pushing Rarity away. "I just got tossed into the side of a car, how do you think I'm doing?" she snapped, leaning against the van for support. She brushed her hair out of her face. "Just get out of here before they drink you. You're supposed to be my next meal." Rarity pursed her lips, but said nothing. She tried to get the dented door open, but it wouldn't budge. Sunset could yo. But Sunset was already making a sprint for Rainbow, pinned against a tree by Bonbon. Sunset was tempted to just rip Bonbon's throat out and be done with it, but there was that voice in the back of her head, telling her not to kill these other vampires. It wasn't their fault they ended up like this. Sunset settled for grabbing Bonbon by her hair, yanking her backwards and socking her across the face. She went down with the single blow, giving Rainbow time to tear toward Rarity, still struggling to get the door open. Pinky and Fluttershy quickly made their way to the car, Pinky fending Lyra off with the broken tree branch. Lyra ducked underneath Pinky's haphazard swing and snatched the branch from her hand, tossing it overhead. Sunset jumped into the air, caught it, and brought it down over Lyra's head with a solid thwack. Lyra teetered back and forth before crumpling to the ground, clutching her skull and groaning loudly. Pinky and Fluttershy gave a cheer of thanks and joined Rainbow and Rarity. That only left Applejack, still carrying Twilight like a backpack. She wasn't far, but carrying Twilight that long had left her winded and slowed. Bonbon sprung like a cheetah, claws stretched out in front of her and eyes gleaming red. "I'm sick of this game. I want food now." Sunset matched Bonbon's speed, shooting across the clearing and shoving Applejack out of the way. She and Twilight tumbled into the dirt, avoiding Bonbon's claws. Sunset was not as lucky. 5 searing lines of pain tore across her chest, slicing through her shirt and tearing her skin to ribbons. Sunset threw her head back and yelled, warm blood running down the remains of her blue blouse, staining it crimson. Sunset grabbed Bonbon's hand, weakly trying to dislodge the nails buried in her chest. She tried to concentrate on breathing, the mere action causing her muscles to twitch uncontrollably. Bonbon grinned sadistically, a face Sunset never thought she'd see on the girl. "Gee, that looks like it hurts a lot." She started to turn her hand to the left, tearing more of Sunset's skin. Sunset screamed louder, her legs giving out beneath her, only to be held up by Bonbon's claws. Tears streamed down her cheeks while she whimpered in sheer agony. Bonbon leaned close and whispered, "That was for Lyra." She grinned again, licking her fangs sultrily. "Well, I guess now's as good a time as any to find out what other vampires taste like." A purple hand gripped Bonbon's wrist, bringing both hers and Sunset's attention to the world around them. Twilight stood in between them, her eyes half closed like she was in a trance. She looked at the blood streaming out of Sunset and covering Bonbon's hand. "Blood!" Twilight whispered. Her eyes widened, revealing their red irises. She yanked Bonbon's hand free from Sunset's chest, allowing her to fall to the ground. Clutching a hand against her wounds, Sunset watched Twilight bite into Bonbon's hand, trying to suck the blood off. Crap! How and why? Bonbon came out of shock and smacked Twilight in the head, sending her to the ground next to Sunset. Okay, what just happened? Sunset coughed, struggling to find her voice. Well, I may have accidentally made her a half-vampire. When? That's an excellent question. When my chest stops bleeding, I'll let you know. From behind Sunset, there was a loud horn and a flood of light. She twisted her head just enough to see Fluttershy's van turned in their direction, the engine revved. With a yell of agony, Sunset grabbed Twilight and pulled her out of the way as the van sped forward and crashed into Bonbon, launching her back into the forest. Sunset gasped for air, propping herself up on one arm to look over Twilight. Hey, she rasped. Why you okay? Twilight opened her eyes again, still crimson. She sat up, looking groggy and confused. Sunset? What's going on? As she spoke, Sunset could see her pointed teeth. And why am I so thirsty? With her gashes healing, Sunset could move into a sitting position without feeling agonizing pain. This had to happen now of all times. Any other moment, this would be perfect. She put a hand on Twilight's shoulder. Don't freak out. Twilight caught sight of Sunset's wounds and scrambled back. What happened to you? It's fine, it'll heal. Sunset waved a dismissive hand. Twilight continued to stare. That's a lot of blood, she said with a hint of longing. Yeah, listen, so. The rattling of a car door interrupted Sunset this time as Rarity and Applejack came over from the van. Are you two okay? Rarity asked. I'll be fine, Sunset said with a layer of irritation. Twilight on the other hand. Twilight was on her feet, staring curiously at the two girls. Blood, thirsty, feed. Her fangs extended. Applejack grabbed Rarity and took a giant step back. Sunset, what did you do? It was an accident. Sunset reached forward and grabbed Twilight by the legs before she could jump at them. But now would be a really good time for you to leave if you value your necks. Applejack and Rarity shared one last moment of hesitation before retreating. The van lingered a minute longer before finally turning down the road. Sunset kept a tight grip on Twilight's ankles, though she stopped struggling after the girls had disappeared into the car. She looked down at Sunset again, eyes flickering between red and violet. Sunset, she said in a heavy and trembling voice, what's happening to me? Sunset sighed. I accidentally. Hey. Lyra sat up, rubbing her head. She looked around. Where's Bonbon? She asked groggily. For the love of Celestia. Sunset pushed herself onto her feet, using Twilight as a support. Listen, Twilight, do you trust me? Twilight stared into her eyes, then nodded firmly. Yes. Then don't move. Sunset bit hard on her lip, drawing a well of blood into her mouth. She cupped Twilight's face and pushed their lips together, slowly secreting the blood into Twilight's mouth. Twilight made a noise of surprise that quickly melted into hungry moans. She slurped every drop of blood Sunset gave to her, then explored Sunset's mouth for more. Sunset yielded, enjoying Twilight's soft lips against hers. Her other hand wrapped around Twilight's waist, but she quickly remembered where they were, and who was watching. She could hear Lyra struggling to get to her feet. Sunset released her, a line of saliva bridging the gap between their mouths. Twilight's crimson eyes stared expectantly into Sunset's. She wiped a hand across her chest, soaking it in the remaining blood, then held it out to Twilight. Her tongue snaked out and licked it up with avarice. Before Sunset's eyes, she could see Twilight's ears became pointed, and her fangs extending past her lip. Within her eyes, Sunset could see a desire for more than just blood. Any other time, Sunset thought bitterly. Any other time. A shadow shot from the trees and slammed into Sunset, throwing her down the road. She landed on her back, pinned by her shoulders and forced to stare up at a livid Bonbon. She didn't say anything, she just bent down and dug her fangs into Sunset's neck. Sunset's body locked up, her blood flowed in reverse, drained out of her system. A primal screech ripped through the night, and Bonbon was torn from Sunset, dragging her fangs across Sunset's throat. Sunset pressed a hand against it, breathing easy that the cuts this time were shallow. She got to her knees and looked behind her, where Twilight grappled with Bonbon. There was a maniacal gleam in Twilight's eye as she blocked Bonbon's hits and struck with her own. Might have given her too much blood. Sunset stood up and took a deep breath, the pain in her chest finally subsiding. A new pain burst across the back of her head, and stars flooded her vision. When she blinked, Sunset found herself staring once again at dirt, a lump of it sitting in her mouth. You know, Lyra's voice floated somewhere above Sunset, there's a voice in my head telling me I shouldn't kill you. But yeah, I'm just gonna ignore it. A boot pressed against Sunset's skull. She tried to push herself off the ground, but Lyra threw her entire weight onto Sunset. Hey, Lyra, catch! Bonbon sailed through the air and crashed into Lyra, knocking them to the ground next to Sunset. She sprung to her feet and rubbed the back of her head, wincing at the tender bruise. She jumped when a hand grabbed her ankle. Bonbon's claws broke through her boot and dug into Sunset's skin. Twilight dropped from the sky and smashed her foot on top of Bonbon's wrist, eliciting a loud, sickening crack. Bonbon howled in pain, while Twilight leaned down, still grinning fiendishly. Gee, that sounded like it hurt a lot. She ground her heel deeper, getting more cracks and whimpers from Bonbon until Lyra got up and slashed Twilight across the face. She leaned back, her head tilted to one side. A giggle passed through her lips, then she threw herself forward, jabbing her claws into Lyra's shoulder, and following up with a punch to the chest. As Lyra stumbled back, Twilight pounced on top of her, laughing in delight. Yep, too much blood. Sunset looked at Bonbon, nursing her shattered wrist. Give up now and I might be able to call her off. Bonbon glared at her. Don't get all high and mighty just because you have a blood-crazed sidekick. Isn't that what you are to Lyra? Bonbon hissed and swung her good arm for Sunset's face. Sunset ducked and brought her boot up into Bonbon's sternum, sending her into the air. With a single jump, Sunset overtook her and wrapped one arm around her neck. She used her free hand to grab Bonbon's good wrist. So, Bonnie, who has a B average, 2 broken wrists, and can't fly. Through Sunset's stranglehold, Bonbon choked out, but I only have one. Snap! Bonbon opened her mouth, letting out a pathetic whine. This girl! Sunset smirked and released her, letting Bonbon drop to the earth. There was a dull thud and a cloud of dust upon impact, followed by a cry of distress from Lyra. Sunset descended to find Twilight straddling Lyra against the ground. Both of them were covered in half-healed cuts and blood. Twilight pinned Lyra's arms down and leaned over her ear. "Shhh," Twilight cooed. "This won't hurt, I promise. I'm just taking your blood. No offense, but you're not really my type." Twilight sank her fangs into Lyra's neck and slurped loudly. Lyra's struggles weakened and she let out a moan of defeat. Eventually, she fell still under Twilight's grip, her eyes glossing over. Sunset rushed over and ripped Twilight off of her. Twilight hissed and lapped up the blood around her mouth. "Why did you stop me?" "You were going to kill her," Sunset said, drawing her mouth in a thin line. "You make that sound like it's a bad thing." Twilight traced a finger along one of her cuts, wiping up some of the blood. "I believe they were trying to kill you first," she said in a sultry whisper. She ran her bloody finger along Sunset's cheek. "And I'd hate to see anything bad happen to you, mistress." Sunset trembled with excitement. The smell of Twilight's blood right under her nose was almost too much. She shook her head, blocking out the alluring mix of blood and lavender. I appreciate it, Twilight, but you can't kill them. Twilight pressed herself closer, lacing her fingers through the holes in Sunset's blouse. What happened to no inhibitions or morals? I'm thirsty, they're right here. I'm not seeing a problem. Sunset ran her fingers through Twilight's hair, sighing deeply. It wasn't just the voice in the back of her head telling her this was wrong, something in her heart was off too. Her body enjoyed every touch Twilight gave her, but it didn't feel right. I'm going to sound like a hypocrite when I say this, but even vampires need limits. I almost raped you, Twilight, and she looked away. Twilight's fingers slipped underneath Sunset's shirt and pushed Sunset to the ground to straddle her. It wouldn't be rape if I want it, she said, a familiar lust in her voice. Her lips were inches away from Sunset. Well, we've come this far, might as well. Sunset closed her eyes and shook her head. Her hand drifted toward her burn marks, then pushed Twilight's face away. I can't, Twilight. I want to, I really want to. But... A frustrated scowl overtook Twilight's face. What happened to you being trisexual? What happened to your vampire urges? Sunset looked away. Someone reminded me that there's something more important. Twilight hissed and pinned Sunset's arms down. You're not going to tell me it's friendship, are you? I'm sorry. Twilight grit her teeth. So am I. She bit into Sunset's neck. Sunset shuddered and tried to push Twilight away, panicking as her energy left her far more quickly than when Bonbon bit her. Chui. Twilight, she mumbled, her vision blurring. She felt Twilight's hands move from her arms down to her belt. I trust you, Sunset breathed as she passed out. Asterisk. Chapter 9, Midnight. You want us to what? Rainbow's shrill voice cut across Canterlot High's campus, disturbing the otherwise peaceful night. She and her friends were gathered around the mirror portal, of which Princess Twilight Sparkle had just stumbled out of a few minutes prior. Her first action upon arriving was taking the bat from Fluttershy and locking it in a small cage before shoving it back through the portal. Afterward, they exchanged short pleasantries before Princess Twilight told them what was required to save Sunset. The princess now looked upon them with apologetic eyes. With their tattered clothes and cuts and bruises, her stomach churned at the news she had to deliver, even if it would help them in the end. She sighed and raised a hoof to her head, only to remember her recent acquisition of fingers. They were much more useful for massaging away headaches. Listen, I know this has been hard. No. Rainbow wildly shook her head. I don't think you understand what we've been through tonight. Or last night. We've come this close. She held her index finger and her thumb a centimeter apart from being drank, turned into vampires, and slashed or killed. And now, you want us to go back? Princess Twilight gestured a hand to the statue behind her, almost losing her balance in the process. The only way I can cure them is if they come through the portal with me. I don't have access to the proper magic required on this side. Rainbow crossed her arms and tipped her head so her bangs shadowed her eyes. Then you go get them. Because if I have to deal with any more vampires tonight, I'm going to lose it. Applejack stepped forward, rubbing her arm and keeping her eyes to the ground. I ain't one to give up, but, you're asking a lot for us, Twilight. You sure there ain't some other way we can do this? Twilight shook her head. If they're really vampires, we can't wait until morning, otherwise, the sun will burn them. She clasped her hands together. I know you're all tired, and I know this is asking a lot. I'm sorry, I really am. I'm always late to help you girls when you need it the most, and I feel awful. She wiped a tear from her eye. I'll go with you, I'll do anything I can to make this easier, but I need you girls to come with me. Please. Rarity took one of Princess Twilight's hands. It's to help a friend, she said in a tired voice. Of course we'll come. Right, Girls. All but Rainbow nodded their heads. They turned their gaze on the odd duck. None of them looked angry, just expectant. Rainbow clenched her fists and released an angry sigh. Fine, I'm coming, too. She made an exaggerated roll of her neck and started for the van. But if I hear the word trisexual, my boot is going up someone's ass. Twilight watched her walk away, then looked back at her remaining friends, searching for an explanation. Chui, sexual. Rarity shrugged helplessly. Did we mention it's been a long night? Asterisk. Princess Twilight had only driven in a car a few times during the Battle of the Bands, and everything about it still fascinated her. A mechanized vehicle that could transport you anywhere, but you still had to control its actions. It was like a personal train. Unfortunately, her fascination was replaced with terror on this particular venture. Fluttershy made the van tear down the streets at speeds that turned the outside lights into nothing more than flickering stars. Twilight felt like she was hurtling through space, and held onto the safety belt for dear life. They swung around a corner and Twilight smacked into Applejack, who had taken one of the window seats. Twilight was snuggled between her and Rarity. Neither of them seemed fazed by Fluttershy's crazy driving. Do people normally drive this fast? It seems dangerous. We're kinda in a hurry, remember? Rainbow said from the front seat. Fluttershy really gets into it when one of us in trouble. Otherwise, we'd be driving slower than a snail. A sharp turn made Rainbow smack her head against the door. The smooth road turned to gravel, and the dark outside became blurred by a veil of dust. A minute later, Fluttershy pulled to a stop at the edge of the forest. Oh my, she whispered, leaning forward in her seat. Applejack opened the door and got out, whistling at the sight before her. Twilight stumbled behind her, still getting used to her new legs. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she gasped at the scene. The ground was sprinkled with blood and impact marks, with branches and rocks littered about. Sunset's leather jacket laid alone in the middle of the road. And just off the path, tied upside down by chains, were two unconscious girls that Twilight identified as the human versions of Lyra and Bonbon. Wow, what did we miss? Pinkie asked, walking over to the tree. Rarity knelt down and picked up Sunset's jacket. Well, I'm guessing Sunset and Twilight won the fight, but, where are they? Twilight joined Pinkie by the tree, watching the unconscious girls' labored breathing. Did Sunset really do this? She walked along the side and found the knot in the chains. Come on, we have to get them down first. Applejack moved to help her, and easily undid the knots. The girls slid down and landed on their heads, groaning in pain. Applejack, be careful. Twilight chastised. Relax, Chui. We told you, they're vampires, too. I doubt it did much to them. Applejack proceeded to tie Lyra and Bonbon up again, back to back with their arms pressed between them. Come on, Rainbow, help me get them back to the van. As they hoisted the duo away, Twilight ran her fingers through her hair. She'd be taking two human natives back to Equestria to get rid of their vampire powers. If it weren't for the fact she and Sunset were already on one side of the mirror, one of them having had an extremely extensive stay, she'd be concerned for the fate of the worlds. Instead, she just hoped Lyra and Bonbon didn't freak out too badly. Speaking of doubles. Twilight looked over to Rarity. I don't think you mentioned what happened to the other me. Where is she? Oh, Rarity's cheeks turned red. Well, we're not entirely sure. You see. Ugh, Lyra groaned, her eyes starting to open. Need more blood? Nope. Rainbow shouted. She swung a fist against Lyra's head, knocking her out cold. Not dealing with this shit again. Twilight took a measured step back from the already distant Rainbow. Her frustration was palpable. Right, well, back to the matter at hand. Something slammed into her stomach and there was a delay between Twilight realizing she was lying on her back, and the stabbing pain in her abdomen. "So, we meet again, princess," a hauntingly familiar voice said. "Oh, crap baskets," Rainbow whined. Fluttershy ran over and helped Twilight into a sitting position. Raising her head up to the towering branches, Twilight found herself looking into a warped mirror. Her reflection grinned at her, showing off pointed fangs extending just past her lower lip. Her eyes glowed red in the night, absent of their glass frames, and her ears poked through her messy hair. Clinging to her body was her damaged school uniform, cut and torn in several places. Rarity rallied behind Fluttershy and Princess Twilight. "Well, in a nutshell, Sunset turned the human you into a vampire." "Great," Twilight said, her voice hitting its higher pitches. "Any other vampires I should know about?" "If there are, you'll find out when we do." The vampire Twilight stopped grinning and appraised them with narrowed eyes. "You girls don't know when to give up, do you?" Rarity raised her hands in a calming manner. "Twilight, dear. The princess is here to help you and Sunset. Speaking of which, where is she? Who says we want help?" The vampire ran her tongue across her teeth. "Sunset and I were about to share a very intimate moment together until you came along." Rainbow gagged. "Enough of the horny vampire act. Just tell us where Sunset is and come quietly so we can fix you." "Didn't you hear me? I don't want your help." Twilight dangled her legs off the branch. She raised her arms over her head and stuck her chest out. "I'm quite happy with this power. I've got the missing piece of me back, and I'm not letting it go this time." Applejack grit her teeth. "Great. It's Midnight Sparkle all over again." Princess Twilight got back to her feet, massaging the spot she had been kicked. Sunset had told her of the entire incident involving the friendship games. Twilight found it hard to believe there had been, however briefly, an evil version of herself destroying the world. Yet in front of her was some vestige of that dark persona, now in the form of a vampire. The other Twilight continued to grin. "Ah yes, my moniker. It would be handy to differentiate between the two of us, wouldn't it, Your Highness? Very well, you can all call me Midnight again." Her eyes narrowed. "Now, leave." Applejack dug her boot into the dirt. "Not without you and Sunset. This vampire business has gone on long enough." Midnight stood up, growled, then smiled deviously. "If you want us, you'll have to come and get us." She jumped back, disappearing into the dark eaves of the trees. A high-pitched giggle echoed after her, settling over the others like the leaves left behind. "So we all know we're walking into a trap, right?" Twilight asked. Fluttershy quivered. "Inside the forest, she'll have all kinds of ways to sneak up on us and get us from behind. Not to mention, we still don't know where Sunset is," Rarity added. Pinky sagged her shoulders. "So what should we do?" "Go in after her," Rainbow said. She finished dragging Lyra and Bonbon to the van and pushed them in. "We really don't have a choice. I'm not doing this another night." She pulled several flashlights out from the back seat and started tossing them out. Twilight caught one and looked to the dark, winding road. Rainbow was right. What choice did they have? "Okay, we stick together in a tight formation. Someone keep a lookout behind us." Applejack picked up a thick branch. "I'll do it." She caught the looks of apprehension her friends were giving her. "What? We need to defend ourselves somehow. Sides, most it'll do is stun her." Twilight shuddered at the mental image of being hit over the head with a large stick. Even if that image was technically of her other self, she could still empathize with the pain. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." "It will," Rainbow said flatly. Twilight sighed. "We never had to get violent when Fluttershy was a vampire." She flicked her flashlight on and let Rainbow take point, following her friends into the unyielding dark. *. Sunset's eyelids were heavy. In fact, her whole body felt sluggish, like someone had filled her with lead. She rolled her head to the side, unable to do more than that. Ugh. She licked her lips, finding them dry like the rest of her throat. Forcing her eyes open, Sunset found a bleary and distorted chapel in front of her. She blinked until it returned to focus, though her senses remained duller than normal. Head clearing of Neverland fog, Sunset realized she was standing upright with her back to a pillar near the altar. Her hands were tied behind her, locked in the chains that coiled her middle. Looking down, Sunset found her shirt had been torn down the middle, revealing her black bra. Her belt buckle was still undone. "Twilight," she growled. She didn't feel violated, and she was sure she would know if Twilight had done anything to her. A knot undid itself in Sunset's chest. Perhaps Twilight's vampire half wasn't in complete control yet. Sunset rattled the chains, testing their hold as well as her strength. The chains held tight, while exhaustion crept up Sunset's arm. She needed blood, and a lot of it. "Great. So we're doing this again." Sunset worked her arms, trying to slide them through the chains. Twilight had proven she was excellent at knot tying. "When I get out of here, someone is getting their neck drained. I don't care who it is." Sunset took a break in her bid for freedom and looked about the chapel. There was no sign of Twilight or anyone else. Sunset's ears twitched. She could pick up some ruckus happening in the forest. "Gonna take a stab in the dark here. The girls came back to save us, only for Twilight to cut them off and they're all running through the forest." Sunset sighed, her irritability levels rising even higher. "They're dead." She resumed pulling on the chains, their rattling loud enough to wake the dead. "Guess I should save them again before Twilight drinks them all dry." Sunset paused again, replaying the look Twilight had given her after Sunset had pulled her off Lyra. "Twilight," she whispered. Even if she did manage to break free, how would she stop the newest blood-crazed vampire? Sunset knew she couldn't take Twilight in a fight in her current condition. Could Sunset even raise a hand against her? Why did Twilight make her pause in all of her actions? Sunset could fly around, biting people left and right and enjoy the rush of power. But the moment Twilight came into the picture, she questioned everything. Sunset bit her lip, drawing a bead of blood. Being her own, it didn't taste extraordinary, but it was still nice to have the metallic tang on her tongue. Though it did nothing for her strength, Sunset resolved to pull harder, her wrists starting to chafe against the metal. Twilight had already been a monster, just like her. If their experience was anything alike, there was a war waging somewhere in Twilight's heart. Sunset just needed to talk her down. Or, knock her unconscious. Whichever comes first. Asterisk. Princess Twilight crept forward, wincing as she stepped on a fallen branch. The cracking limb made everyone jump, with Fluttershy releasing a small eep. Rainbow glared back at Twilight, who could only smile sheepishly in return. The group tightened its defensive circle and continued along the forest road, their lights flashing in all directions. The brush continuously rustled around them, and Midnight's giggle occasionally drifted out from the shadows, but so far, she hadn't revealed herself. The suspense began to mount on all of them. The hairs on the back of Twilight's neck were constantly on end. That had never been a good sign when she was a pony, so she was sure it didn't mean anything positive now. A line of sweat coated her forehead, despite the chilly temperature. Next to her, Pinky's teeth violently chattered, and Fluttershy made squeaking noises every few seconds. They were all pressed tight together, eyes pointed in all directions. Still, Twilight didn't feel safe. None of them were safe. Midnight was watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the meantime, she toyed with them, letting their anxiety build and build. Twilight had to admit, it was a devious strategy. But, if everyone stuck together, it was 6 against 1. All they needed to do was get to the steeple and stay in the open. Rainbow came to an abrupt stop, throwing off their movement rhythm. Twilight bumped into Fluttershy, and Applejack kept backing up until she ran into Rainbow. Both of them jumped, and Applejack swung around, looking over Rainbow's shoulder. "Why'd we stop?" In front of them, leaves, twigs, and bramble were conspicuously clustered together to cover an obvious pitfall. Rainbow put her hands on her hips. "This is the oldest trick in the book. She doesn't seriously think we're this dumb." Twilight leaned to the side to get a better look. Even in the dark, one could see the space beneath the covering. She opened her mouth to comment, but a hand blocked her, gripping her cheeks tight while another wrapped around her middle and dragged her off to the side. Before Twilight was fully aware of what had happened, her arms were wrapped behind her back and her flashlight was on the ground. "I can't wait to see what you taste like, princess," a voice whispered in her ear. Twilight silently screamed as two fangs broke the skin on her neck and sank into her vein. Her blood was sent off course, directed into Midnight Sparkle's mouth instead of the rest of her circulation system. The trap was the bait for the trap. Twilight's thoughts began to slow, even as she continued to kick and struggle in defiance. "Get off of her!" Rainbow flew through the bushes and body-checked Midnight into the nearest tree, ripping her fangs out of Twilight's neck. The world lurched to one side and came in and out of focus for Twilight. She felt Rainbow take her by the arm and yank her forward. Twilight stumbled over her feet several times before her head began to clear. The longer branches snagged at her clothes, tearing open holes and nicking her skin. They burst through the foliage and onto the main road, nearly crashing into Applejack and the others. "Run for it!" Pinkie screamed, tearing off down the road. "Wait, that's what she wants," Twilight panted. Her head swam and she was only passively aware of what was happening around her. She knew Rainbow was still pulling her forward, and she could hear Midnight laughing somewhere in the darkness. Twilight's sense slowly returned, and she saw their defensive circle was broken. The girls were now just racing to make sure they weren't left behind. Slowly but surely, Twilight's blood recirculated, and she pulled her arm free, deciding she could carry her own weight. Her head was still woozy, but she wouldn't let Rainbow fall behind as well. In one motion, Midnight jumped from the trees, snatched up Fluttershy, and jumped to the other side of the road. Twilight barely had enough time to turn her head to follow the spectacle. "Fluttershy!" Rainbow yelled. She ground her heels to a halt, kicking up dirt before she twisted and dashed after them. Applejack cursed and ran after Rainbow, brandishing her stick as she charged. "Wait!" Twilight yelled. "We shouldn't." She looked down the road, where Pinkie and Rarity were already hazy specks against the backdrop of darkness. Impressive seeing as Rarity wore her heeled boots. "Oh no, oh no!" Twilight danced in place. Either go into the trees and help her friends, or stick to the road where she knew she wouldn't get lost. As desperately as she wanted to chase after Rainbow and Applejack, Twilight knew that was a foolhardy idea. But they were dealing with a vampire. But then, what could Twilight do without her magic? She stomped the ground and cried in frustration, then ran after Pinkie and Rarity. "I'll catch up, then we'll double back to help. There's power in numbers." The road turned and sloped up before the trees gave way to a large clearing, where a steeple sat at the top of a hill. Near the entrance, Pinkie and Rarity were doubled over, gasping for breath. Rarity looked up as Twilight drew near, and her face went rigid. "Oh no! Don't tell me we left the others behind." Twilight leaned against the doorframe and took a few deep breaths. "Chui!" Midnight got Fluttershy and ran off, and Applejack and Rainbow chased after her. Pinkie's eyes bulged. "We have to go back for them." "My thoughts exactly," Twilight said, standing up straight. "But, we need a plan first. The human me is clearly just as intelligent, so, do you hear that?" They all silenced their breathing and heard the sounds of chains rattling from inside the steeple. "Oi!" a familiar voice shouted, "get your scrawny butts in here." Rarity gasped and led them into the foyer. It was dim, the only illumination coming from the moon shining through the open door, and the candles flickering in the chapel. Twilight overtook Rarity and made her way down the aisles, to where Sunset was chained to the front pillar, a scowl on her face. "Well, it's about time you got here." Asterisk. Sunset tapped her foot as Princess Twilight and the others approached. She didn't double-take when Twilight first came through the doors. She knew the differences between her and human Twilight to not bat an eye at the sight of them. And, quite frankly, she was too agitated to care which was which at the moment, as long as one of them untied her. Twilight stared, a mixture of confusion and shock on her face. Her eyes lingered on Sunset's open shirt for a moment, then quickly found her eyes. "Are you okay? And, why are you chained up like that?" "Because human you is quite kinky when she's corrupted," Sunset said, unable to hide her grin. It quickly fell and she shook the chains again. "Now, untie me." "It's not as sexy as they make it out to be." Twilight's cheeks burned, and she moved to undo the chains, but Rarity held an arm out. "And what are you going to do if we free you?" There was a hint of accusation in her voice. Sunset knitted her brow. "Excuse me, last I checked, I saved your asses. I think some gratitude is in order. You turned Twilight into a vampire." "It was an accident." Rarity crossed her arms. "Well, accident or not, she's out there hunting down the rest of our friends. So if we let you go, whose side are you on?" "Yours." Sunset sighed and bowed her head. Twilight isn't supposed to be a vampire. When she snaps out of it, Sunset shook her head. "I have to stop her before she does something she'll regret." "And afterward?" Sunset made a guilty, lopsided smile. "Well, afterward, I was probably going to drink you all myself." "Sunset." Twilight jumped back. "What?" "I like the rush of power. Sue me." Her smile fell. "But if you let me go, I'll do whatever you say. Just hurry up before the others end up as prunes." Pinky shifted her weight from one foot to the next. "We are on a tight schedule." The others nodded in agreement and Pinky got to work untying Sunset. She sprung forward as soon as her arms were free, startling Rarity and Twilight back. Sunset rubbed her sore wrists and rolled her shoulders. "Oh, that feels good." A dull roar rose up from the hollow cavern that was Sunset's stomach, and she smacked her parched lips together. "Yes, oh, there's one more caveat I forgot to mention if you want me to help." Rarity's eyes widened. "Oh no. Yeah, Twilight sucked a lot of my blood, and I'm starving again, so." Pinky raised her arm. "I volunteer." "Hell to the no." Sunset pointed to Rarity and Twilight. "It has to be one of you two." Twilight stepped in front of Rarity. "Can't you do this without drinking anyone's blood?" "Nope." Sunset ran her tongue over her fangs. "One of the few drawbacks of being a vampire. No blood, no strength." "But..." Sunset grabbed Twilight by the front of her shirt and lifted her in the air. "We do not have time to argue this. Our friends' lives are in danger. Either I drink Rarity or I drink you. And since you need to be conscious to change the other vampires back to normal, guess who it's going to be?" She brought Twilight closer. "You do have a way to fix this, don't you?" Twilight trembled in her grasp. "Why yes, I think so." "Good answer. So, are we gonna keep arguing this, or are we?" "Hi, Sunset." "Hey, Chui." "Or are we?" Sunset looked beyond the twilight sparkle she was holding to the one standing in the doorway, an unconscious Applejack and Fluttershy at her feet. Midnight smiled and licked the remaining blood off her mouth. No one moved or made a sound for a full minute. Finally, Pinky said, "We're all gonna die, aren't we?" "Pinky, don't help," Sunset said, lowering Twilight to the ground. Midnight stepped over the two unconscious girls and strutted forward. "I leave for half an hour and I find you cheating on me with me." She stuck her lower lip out. "Mistress, I'm hurt." Twilight edged back as Midnight drew closer. Cheating. Didn't Sunset tell you? She's completely trisexual. I guess she meant both Twilights. Twilight's cheeks turned red. Well, that's one mystery solved. Midnight waved her hand to the side. Good. Now, could you all move aside, please? My mistress and I have some urgent business we need to attend to. Sunset crossed her arms. If it's so urgent, why didn't you do it out in the forest? You had plenty of time and no interruptions. Well, Midnight cleared her throat. I wanted the right atmosphere is all. This is more romantic than a spot of dirt. There was a flutter in Sunset's chest. Face it, Twilight, deep down, you couldn't go through with it because you knew it was wrong. You still want to be in control. You fought that urge because you care too much about our relationship. Sunset added in a smaller voice, you fought because I trusted you. Midnight hissed. Don't presume to know why I did what I did. I do what I want because I can. Because I have all the power. That gaping hole is finally gone. I feel invincible and I'm not going to let you or anyone else. Hi. Rainbow leaped from behind and brought the branch down on Midnight's head. It snapped in half with an ear-splitting crack and left Midnight hunched over. She stood in place, tilting forward, eyes wide in astonishment. Midnight whirled around and grabbed Rainbow by her neck. A red stream made its way down the back of Midnight's head. So, Rainbow, on a scale of 1 to 10, how smart do you think that plan was? Rainbow gurgled out a few choice swears. So is that a 1? Pinkie ran to help free Rainbow, though Sunset doubted she could do much. Rarity tried to run forward as well, but Sunset grabbed her arm and pulled her back. She abdicated asking for permission and just sank her teeth into Rarity's neck, covering her mouth so she wouldn't scream. Twilight's eyes dilated and her mouth gaped in horror, but she didn't make a sound. After the initial shock, a resolve flickered in her eyes and she clenched her fist. She turned and tackled Midnight from behind, helping Pinkie bring her to the floor. Sunset took one last, long drink from Rarity, then gently lowered her to the ground. Her body trembled at the new surge of strength, and she punched the air in excitement. Twilight. Both Twilights stopped their grappling and looked up at her. Air, the vampire won. Midnight kneed Twilight in the stomach, then threw Pinkie into a staggering Rainbow. Yes, mistress, she asked standing upright. Playtime's over. I know you think you need this power, but it's just messing with your head. Hello, Pot, I'm Kettle. Sunset ran a hand through her hair. Fair enough. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy being a vampire. But you're human. You never had this level of power to begin with. You don't need it either. You're fine just the way you are, Sparky. Midnight's eyes softened. Do you really mean that, Sunset? Of course I do. Rainbow groaned in the corner. Gag, me. Sunset ignored her. Come on, let's put this whole thing behind us and go back to being semi-normal high school girls. Midnight stepped closer, a tear rolling down her cheek. She lifted a hand out to Sunset. Sunset reached for it, a warm smile on her face. A fist impacted against her stomach, and she flew backwards, crashing into what was left of the stained glass window and landing in the courtyard behind the church. She got to her hands and knees shaking the glass off of her as Midnight perched on the windowsill. Did you really think I was going to fall for that a second time? She threw her head back and laughed. Sunset got to her feet. Can't blame a friend for trying. Midnight jumped down and sauntered toward her. You're right though, let's put this behind us and just make passionate love. She gestured back to the chapel. There's a whole meal in there waiting for us. We can drink to our heart's content, and spend the rest of the night making each other scream in pleasure. Sunset's primal instinct wanted to scream yes, but she shoved it down. I'm not entertaining that idea anymore, Twilight. You're getting treated. Sunset put her fists up. Even if I have to knock you out first. Please, Midnight said, rolling her eyes, you wouldn't lift a hand. Sunset flew at her, grabbing by the wrist and swinging her around into one of the crumbling stone pillars that held up nothing. It cracked under the force, and dust rained down on Midnight's body. She pushed herself up in time for Sunset to fly at her and smash her deeper into the pillar. This time, it collapsed into a pile of rubble and old vines. When the dust cleared, Midnight laid in the debris, her bun undone and new tears in her clothes. Her eyes flickered open and a growl rose in her throat. She shot to her feet and jumped at Sunset, bringing her fist back. Sunset grabbed it as it came forward and twisted it around Midnight's back before kicking her back into the pile of stones. This time as she rose, Midnight took one of the larger stones and flung it at Sunset. Whoa! Sunset ducked, but Midnight's shoe met her chin and sent her straight into the air. Sunset caught herself and brought her leg straight down over Midnight's head, but Midnight caught it and threw Sunset across the yard and into a dried-up fountain pond. Sunset hit the dirt, bounced up, and was punched again by Midnight as she ran past. Sunset rolled into the grass, coming to a stop at the fence. Footsteps rushed toward her, and Sunset rolled to the side narrowly avoiding Midnight's kick. Sparky, Sunset said, getting to her feet. Remember what I told you. Remember what you told me. You're not a monster. You can fight this. Maybe. Midnight wiped a smear of blood off the side of her face. But I don't want to. Is that what I sound like? Midnight rushed her, but Sunset was ready. She flew into the air, then dived at Midnight from behind, pinning her with a full Nelson. Sunset floated back into the air, hovering high above the courtyard. Their skin glowed in the light of the moon. Midnight continued to struggle but Sunset's grip was iron tight. Twilight. Let me go. Let me go. I need this power. No you don't, Twilight, Sunset said gently. No one does. I underestimated the amount of magic you took in at the games. I know you feel empty without it. I know sometimes you feel alone. But that's why you have friends. We're here to fill the void. Sunset's eyes clouded over. I wish I could have remembered that myself a few nights ago. I know the urge is strong, Twilight, but I know you're stronger. Come on, prove you're stronger than the instincts of a stupid bat. Midnight stopped struggling and went limp in Sunset's hold. Silence filled the night. Then. Please, Sunset, take it away. Sunset smiled. That's my girl. She bit into Twilight's neck, sucking just enough blood so she fell unconscious. Sunset repositioned Twilight in her arms, holding her like a new bride. She sighed. You still don't know how badly I want you, Twilight. But maybe another time. *. Chapter 10, Crimson Love. Sunset groaned, turning over on her soft pillow. A bird continued to chirp outside her window, and she wished it would be quiet for at least another hour. Still, it persisted, and Sunset had no choice but to crack her eyes open, finding a crystallized ceiling above her. She blinked 3 times, forcing the bleariness to go away. The crystal ceiling remained, shimmering in multiple hues. What? Where am I? It was a bit of a struggle, but Sunset lifted herself up, removing a hoof from under her bed sheets. She twisted about and ran her hooves over her face. Her eyes grew wider as it dawned on her she was rubbing her face with hooves. A pony? When? How? Blurry images bubbled to the surface of her bewildered mind. She rubbed her forehead, hoping to clear up her memory. She could see it now, her fight with Twilight. Helping her friends get to safety. Going back through the portal before the sun came up. After that, everything was still hazy. An impatient growl broke her train of concentration. Her stomach felt hollow, so hollow in fact, that it was ready to cave in on itself. Ugh, it can't even be noon and I already need more. Sunset paused. Actually, she didn't feel the need to drink blood. She was hungry, not for sweet red liquid, but actual food. Turning her head to the left, there was a small table with a bowl of assorted fruits. Sunset reached for it with a hoof, but remembered the convenience that was her horn. Her magic came to her like a second instinct, and she picked an apple up and brought it to her mouth. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she just wasn't imagining the change. Her stomach roared again, and Sunset bit into the red, juicy fruit. It tasted delicious. Sunset tore into it with fervor, savoring every taste and texture. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm normal," she cried, tossing the apple core into the air. She went to work on the vine of grapes, popping them in 3 at a time. A door to her right opened up, and a voice said, "Sunset, you're awake. And it looks like you're doing better." Sunset twisted around and found Princess Twilight Sparkle beaming at her. She swallowed the mouthful of grapes and smiled as well. "Hey, Twilight." Princess Twilight trotted over and sat next to Sunset's bed. "Hi, Sunset." She blushed and rubbed a hoof against her neck. "Looks like I kinda dropped the ball again, didn't I? Seems every time you need me, I'm not around." Seeing the guilt in the princess' eyes, Sunset was desperate to say something, but words failed her. She had really needed Princess Twilight's help, or at least some general advice. At the same time, "It's not fair for me to keep relying on you whenever we have a problem though. You've got enough to worry about as is. Still, as resourceful and resilient as you are, this was something I think could have only been solved with access to magic." Twilight stood up and held a hoof to Sunset. "Do you think you can walk?" Sunset took her hoof and eased her way out of bed. She was a little wobbly, but she soon found her footing and trotted along after the princess. Sunset marveled at the large hallways and ornamented doors. "So, this is your castle? It's huge." "Yeah," Princess Twilight giggled. "I still find new rooms I haven't explored sometimes." She led Sunset into the library, where the mirror portal sat against the back wall, still active. "I wish I could have brought you over under more pleasant circumstances." On a table next to the portal was a small cage containing the bat. It hung from the bars, asleep with its wings folded around its body. Sunset kept her distance, rubbing her neck. "So, how did you cure us?" She looked around. "And where is everyone?" Twilight gestured to the portal. "I sent them back home as soon as the treatment was done. They had already been vampires. I felt the less time they stayed as ponies, the better." She trotted over to a small sitting table. "It's a good thing your school has already been exposed to so much magical weirdness." Sunset joined her, taking a seat on an overstuffed pillow. "Yeah. Otherwise, we'd have a lot of complicated questions to answer." She shifted on her pillow, trying to get adjusted to her pony anatomy again. "So, everyone's okay? Rarity and Lyra and Twilight. Everyone's fine. They're all probably waiting for you on the other side." Twilight shared a familiar look. "I just thought you'd like a little extra time here at home." "Home?" Sunset looked at her hoof. Her magic swirled around inside her very being, making her feel whole. "Thanks." She cleared her throat. "So, back to the cure." "Oh, right. Well, in a nutshell, I used my magic to extract the vampirism from you by reflecting the general traits onto the original host." Twilight nodded to the bat cage. "I never told you about the similar incident that happened here, did I?" "No, I don't think so." Twilight smiled fondly. "It was a good lesson for all of us. Remind me to tell you the full story later." The short version is, our Fluttershy became a vampire pony by taking on characteristics of the vampire fruit bats that had invaded Applejack's orchard. Except she only craved apples. "Yeah, that doesn't sounded as bad as wanting blood," Sunset mused. "In hindsight, no, but we still wanted our friend back. So after cornering her, I was able to magically remove the desires of the vampire fruit bat, thus taking away those characteristics as well. She nodded toward Sunset. Basically, I did the same thing to you, albeit a bit more advanced. You might still be a little sensitive to sunlight though. Sunset ran a tongue across her teeth, feeling their dullness. Hey, if the only cost to being normal is wearing more sunscreen, I think I'll be fine. I'm glad you feel that way. Twilight tapped her hoof on the table and bit her lip. What I don't quite get is, how was this bat able to turn you all into vampires in the first place? They took a minute to think. Sunset lifted her hoof onto the table and leaned against it. I have a theory. Since the human world doesn't have vampire fruit bats, when it crossed through, the mirror must have decided to just pick one. It turned it into a vampire bat, but since it still had equestrian magic in it. Twilight nodded. It's a good a theory as any. Sunset eyed the bat again. What are you going to with it now? I don't know. A shadow crossed Twilight's face. Since I reflected all the vampire traits it gave you back onto it, it definitely doesn't just want apples anymore. It has the ability to turn other ponies into vampires. It's one of the most dangerous creatures in existence as of now. Twilight sighed. It might be better just to get rid of it. Sunset sucked a slow breath between her teeth. It was dangerous, yes, but death seemed a little harsh. Still, part of her was still angry at it for all the trouble it caused. I don't think Fluttershy would agree to that. Twilight shook her head. No. Neither of them would. I'll consult Princess Celestia first. Maybe she'll have a better solution. How is she? Twilight pierced Sunset with her violet eyes. Sunset couldn't meet them for very long and bowed her head. You know, busy as always. Yet. She misses you. Yet. She's proud of you. Sunset raised her head again. If this hadn't just happened, then maybe. Sunset shook her head. She knew she was just making excuses now. But it simply wasn't the right time. She stood up, shaking her rear legs out before heading to the mirror. I should probably head back now. Twilight sighed, but got up to see Sunset through. They faced each other in front of the dais. Well, next time I come through, it'll be just for fun. No monster attacks, no end of the world scenarios. Just you, me, and the girls hanging out. Sounds like a plan. Sunset smiled. Thank you, Princess. You may be a little late, but you always come through. Her cheeks turned red. I'm sorry about all the trouble I put you through last night. Twilight flicked her ears and shrugged. I've been in dangerous situations before. No big deal. Her own cheeks turned red. But, forgive me for asking, but, do you really have a crush on the other me? Heart hammering in her chest, Sunset's cheeks went from red to crimson. Well, you know, she's gotta go righty soon bye. Sunset dove into the portal, letting the swirling vortex overtake her. Anything was better than telling your best friend you found her human counterpart more attractive. Colors and shapes swirled around her, flashing like the world's wildest rave party. Sunset's body stretched and contorted, reshaping itself into its human form. One moment later, she was on the ground, staring at several pairs of boots. 2 sets of arms helped her to her feet. She wobbled for a second but quickly found her balance. Examining herself, she was grateful to see the portal had restored her clothes from their previous tattered conditions. Looking up, she found all her friends smiling expectantly at her, though she could tell Twilight's was forced. Her shoulders were low, and she kept her hands close to her chest. Coupled with her pigeon-toed stance, Sunset knew what was going on through her head. Standing off to the side were Lyra and Bonbon, looking a little lost. They gave an awkward wave to Sunset which she returned. So, Rainbow said, crossing her arms. You done being a blood-sucking demon? Sunset raised a hand. She contemplated slapping Rainbow upside the head but decided against it. The sun was falling behind her, turning the world orange. Her skin itched a little, but other than that, she felt fine. Not thirsty, not bursting into flames. You're also not sparkling, Pinky added. She saw the deadpan look Rainbow gave her and shrugged. What? No, Pinky. Just no. Sunset smiled. So, you're all okay? Rarity nodded, though she ran her fingers over the bite mark on her neck. I guess being part magic helps us heal faster. We all woke up soon after you went through the portal. We were a little lightheaded, but no worse for wear. That's good. Sunset lowered her eyes and fiddled with her thumbs. Listen, girls, I'm so up. Rarity stuck her hand out. Enough apologies. We know, dear. It wasn't your fault. And as much trouble as the whole experience put us through, you came through in the end. She looked over at Twilight. Both of you. Twilight's forced smile twisted into a grimace. Lyra finally walked over, finding a good moment to slip in. Rarity's right. We've kinda been throwing apologies around for the last hour. She rubbed the back of her head. It gets old kinda fast. But, me and Bonnie are still sorry about, fighting you to the death. Sunset waved a hand. Apology accepted. I'm sorry you got sucked into all this magical craziness. Yeah, this has to be the weirdest thing yet, and that's saying a lot. Lyra stretched her arms behind her head. Her eyes looked between Sunset and Twilight. So, are you two like a couple? Or was that just the vampire thing? Because we could totally go on a double date. Both Twilight and Sunset shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at each other while they stammered out feeble half-sentences. Anything Sunset said would put Twilight on the spot, and that was something she couldn't handle right now. Besides, that was a decision they needed to make in private. Sunset looked to her friends for help, but they looked as expectant as Lyra. Lyra grinned. Okay, I get it. You guys are just best friends, right? That's cool. But hey, if you have any more wild adventures, you should totally call me and Bon Bon up. Bon Bon took Lyra by the arm. No, Lyra. Just no. She looked at Sunset with dark circles under her eyes. Please leave us out of your next adventure. I just want to go home and take a nap. She dragged Lyra off while Lyra held a thumb and pinky to her ear. Call me, she mouthed. Fluttershy kicked a loose pebble across the pavement. So, what do we do now? Sunset scratched the back of her hand. First, let's find somewhere with a little more shade. She looked at Twilight from the corner of her eye. Then we can talk. They moved from the front courtyard to the stadium, half of it covered by the lengthening shadow of dusk. They settled on the lower bleachers and sat in silence. Sunset knew they ought to talk, but how did they begin the conversation without another apology? Applejack put her hands up. All right, let's all just agree this whole experience sucked. Pinky snickered. I get it. 'Cause we were dealing with vampires. I was trying to be serious. Rarity crossed one leg over the other and leaned forward. Well, even if this experience did indeed suck, she glared at a giggling Pinky. I'm sure we can take away a few lessons from this. Fluttershy raised a hand. Don't split the party. Yes, that's one. Rainbow leaned back against the higher seats. Sometimes, you gotta hit your friends really hard to stop them from drinking your blood. I suppose. Rarity rolled her hand. Though I was thinking more along the lines of friendship overcoming even the most adverse challenges, and sticking together and believing in each other, even when things seem grim. Rainbow frowned. I mean, you're not wrong. But I like mine better. Rolls off the tongue easier. A bubble of air rose in Sunset's throat, and after a few seconds of fighting it, it finally escaped as a short chuckle, followed by another one. Pinky's own giggling didn't help matters. Soon Sunset was laughing in earnest, joined by her friends. Rarity tried to keep a straight face but cracked under the unified mirth of the group. Come now, it wasn't that funny. Sunset wiped her eyes. No, but after the nights we've had, everything seems funnier, doesn't it? I reckon you're right, Applejack said. Or at least, it seems so implausible, you can't help but laugh. We survived an invasion of vampires. Fluttershy sighed. Things just keep getting weirder, don't they? I hope we fight werewolves next. Pinky said, bouncing in her seat. There was a collective, no. The sun's light had almost fully receded, leaving the world in the last flickering shades of twilight. A chilly night wind blew over them, and one by one, they stood up to go. Would anyone like a ride home? Fluttershy offered. The majority said yes. Twilight pulled out her phone, still stained with dirt and flecks of blood. No thanks. I should call my parents. Make sure they aren't freaked out or anything. Sunset also shook her head. I can walk from here. Thanks anyway, Shy. Rarity gave a dubious look to the pair but waved her hand in dismissal. Very well. We'll see you both tomorrow. Just remember, we're all one call away if either of you need anything. We're all still friends, okay? Twilight nodded but said nothing. Don't worry, Rarity, we know, Sunset said. She waved to them as they went, staring into the distance after they turned the corner to the parking lot. She breathed a slow sigh through her nose. Rarity had been right, their friendship had overcome adversity again, but it was only after people had gotten hurt. What was she supposed to take away from that? What was she supposed to tell Twilight? After breathing another sigh, Sunset scooted a little closer to Twilight. They sat in silence, watching the stars come out before the stadium lights switched on and drowned them in artificial light. So, Sunset said slowly, I'm guessing they already gave you the whole, it's not your fault speech, right? Twilight nodded. Well, they're right. It's not. Sunset bowed her head. It's mine. Twilight looked at her. But I'm the one who turned you into a vampire. Sunset clenched her fists. I turned you into a monster because I couldn't control myself. The bleachers creaked as Twilight closed the gap between her and Sunset. I understand how hard it is to control yourself when you're like that. She pushed her glasses up and wiped her eyes. So it's not really your fault. Her voice shook, and she rubbed her eyes furiously. I know you tried as hard as you could. Why you beat it in the end? Please, don't blame. Her dam broke, and Twilight flung herself onto Sunset, crying into her shoulder. Sunset quickly balanced herself, caught off guard by Twilight's sudden tackle. When she regained her balance, she wrapped her arms around Twilight and patted her back. It didn't go away, Sunset. I thought it did, but it was always there. I'm a monster. I loved having all that power. I loved hurting Lyra and attacking all my friends. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't even try. Sunset didn't say a word. She just rocked Twilight back and forth while she released all the tears she had saved up. When Twilight began to quiet down, Sunset said gently, You did try, Twilight. You told me to take it away, remember? You fought it at the end. At the end, Twilight said miserably. Why couldn't I fight it sooner? The same reason I couldn't. Part of us missed that power we had tapped into. Sunset took a deep breath, inhaling the faint scent of lavender still clinging to Twilight. I misjudged the amount of power you took in at the games. I should have said more to you than just, it'll go away. And I've tapped into a more virtuous power than the corruption you and I experienced. I shouldn't have been craving more of it after that. So in the end this is my fault, Twilight. I'm sorry. Twilight slowly pulled away and moved her hands down to Sunset's. She took them within her own and gave them a light squeeze. Rarity is right. I think we've done enough apologizing now. Her brief smile was shadowed by the dip of her head. We both messed up. A lot. Sunset's stomach fluttered at the contact with Twilight. Yeah, we kinda did. But you were right. I stopped myself before I went too far with you. And you did the same. When it really counted, we found ourselves. Yeah. I guess we did. Twilight kept her head bowed, not sounding relieved in the slightest. Sunset removed one of her hands from beneath Twilight's and raised her chin with a finger. Okay, Sparky. We're both 2 for 2 on the monster count. We both did some messed up things. But you want to know the silver lining this time. Sunset saw the sparkling curiosity she had come to admire and adore in Twilight's eyes. We both messed up. We both have new scars that are going to hurt for a while. But that means we can heal together this time. Twilight smiled. You're right. Someone who's had a tragic event happen to them heals better when they have someone who can relate to it. And I think we can relate to each other pretty well. They both started to giggle. It was weak, but Sunset could feel the catharsis already beginning. She moved her hand back down, hesitated for a moment, then took Twilight's. I'll do better this time, Twilight. I'll be here whenever you need me. Even when that void is gone. Twilight's cheeks turned red, but she didn't break eye contact with Sunset. And I'll be here for you. We can be 2 monsters learning to be human again. Sunset leaned a little closer, her own cheeks growing warm. You're not a monster, Twilight. You're not a bad person. You were just forced to make a few bad choices. Hello, Pot, I'm Kettle, Twilight whispered. They stared at their reflections in each other's eyes before Sunset took the plunge. She tilted her head and closed her eyes, finding Twilight's soft lips just beyond the darkness. There was no feral instinct, no desire to ravage Twilight's body, no craving for blood. Sunset just wanted to enjoy the gentle press of Twilight's mouth against hers while she ran her fingers through Twilight's hair. Sunset eased away, a goofy smile on her face. So much better without the fangs. Twilight laughed, then remembered to slide her glasses back on. She fingered one of her tresses and looked away, her face still red. Sunset. I was wondering, she looked back. Do you think I could have those guitar lessons now? Her stomach let out a long growl. And maybe a pizza, too. Sunset's grin widened. She stood up and took Twilight by the hand. Of course you can, Sparky. They stepped off the bleachers and started down the road, their hands wrapped around one another. Now, how do I tell the princess about this? End Sunlight, by the Albino Corn.